Well, good morning, church. It's good to be able to worship with you today. I'm sure a few of you are sleepy like I am because you stayed up pretty late watching a basketball game. You'll notice that although neither Pastor Athena and I are particularly UNC fans, we both wore our Carolina blue collar shirts today. When in Rome, right? It's, oh, you are a UNC fan. All right. Today's Be the Light Sunday. You probably picked up in the readings that they all had something to do with light and darkness. And our gospel reading today comes from the first chapter of the Gospel of John. And I think it's important to say up front that when they talk about light and darkness, they're talking about the ability to see and not the ability to see. They are in no way talking about skin color. Again, most of the people who wrote the Bible were Mediterranean, right? They had brown skin. So the idea that light skin was better than dark skin is certainly not what these scriptures were meant or intended. They have been used that way over time. But today when we talk about light and darkness, we're talking about the ability to see and not to see. And in an ancient world, without electricity, that was a big deal. That was a big deal. The city on a hill cannot be hidden. Imagine that you're walking to a city and something delays you, and all of a sudden you're walking and it's nighttime and you can't see. Boy, how great it would be to see that city up on a hill. Boy, how great it would be to know that there's a place for you to go. Well, the Gospel of John starts out in the beginning, the way that Genesis starts out. John is sort of speaking into the Genesis story. And the Genesis story begins with light and darkness. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and he said that it was good. And so the thing that Jesus is that light in the world. It's the ability to see when one could not see. And the way that gets personified is also the Logos, the truth. And it's not just that what God is true, it's that when Jesus speaks, he is revealing truth to you. It's a knowable truth. It's a relatable truth. It's not a hidden truth anymore. And that's kind of a big deal because to meet Jesus was to know the mind and heart of God. No longer were we trying to appease God in a way that we didn't know. Jesus comes down and gives us pretty reliable ways. He says, if you pray to God, do it this way. If you want to know what it means to follow the law, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? Jesus gives us really tangible ways to get to know God. And in John's gospel, what we find is people learning about God through Jesus. There are no parables in John's gospel, only communication with Jesus, only conversation. And one of the really great ones is actually about light and darkness. By the way, when we get to the fall, the Bible study I want to do this year is on the Gospel of John. I think the Gospel of John is maybe the most beautiful thing that's ever been written. And it has so many beautiful themes that are woven together like a tapestry. And today, just as a preview, we're going to look at just one, light and darkness. So you probably know the story of Nicodemus that happens in chapter 3. But one of the things that we miss is that Nicodemus comes to Jesus in the middle of the night. The reason he does this is because he is a high priest. He's already supposed to know everything. He's not supposed to be still a learner. He's supposed to be a teacher. And so afraid that he will be seen for who he really is, he comes to Jesus at midnight. And he asks Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And the conversation with Jesus doesn't go very well for Nicodemus. He doesn't understand because he's trying to fit Jesus back into his methodology, right? Conversely, the very next day, Jesus is on the road in Samaria, and he has to go to the well where he meets a woman. And we don't know her name. She's just called the woman at the well. And in it, Jesus reveals himself as Messiah. So that theme of light and darkness shows up in John as once we are actually willing to show up for who we are, that's when we can see Jesus clearly. Nicodemus wanted a head knowledge and not a heart knowledge. He wanted to find a power in Jesus that he himself could wield. The woman at the well, on the other hand, gives herself over to the conversation, and because of that, she finds Jesus where he is. Well, I don't know about you, but I think we've all been through what we call the dark night of the soul. There's times in our lives when we feel like we're walking around in darkness. I can think of a few times in my life that felt pretty deep and pretty dark. Times in the literal night when you were begging for sunrise. Times when all hope felt like it was fleeting, like my faith was hanging on by a thread, like my life was in the balance. Times in pain, times in a hospital room, times at the death of a loved one, times when you were worried, times that you were regretful for something that you had done. I think we all find the darkness that's being talked about in John's gospel and know that even in those times, there will be a dawn. You know, one of the great things that happens in John's gospel is that the women go to the tomb while it was still dark. That even in that darkest moment, even when their leader had been crucified brutally and was dead, they refused to let the darkness win. They refuse to let the bad moments define his life. In fact, the reason that they head to the tomb is so that they can embalm Jesus' body, so that the persecution, so that the anger of the world, so that all of the sins of the world were not going to have the final say on Jesus' body. They were still going to purify him for burial. And I think that moment is one that we all hold on to, that even in the darkest moments of our lives, we know instinctively that we must connect to goodness of others, goodness in life. I think we all have our own dark moments, and maybe there's not a one cure fits all. But I would say, as a general rule, that finding a way to connect to goodness will get you on the right path out of that darkness. You see, sometimes instead of goodness, we go for pleasure, right? When we hit that rock bottom, we go for pleasure because it's goodness adjacent. It feels good, right? And so we pick up extra drinking or gluttony, or we pick up a lot of bad habits because what we're trying to do is grasp onto goodness, and that shelf is just easier to reach out to than a friend. But in our darkest moments, if we reach out our hand for goodness, goodness will find us. One of the things I've been praying about during the pandemic is that it feels like people are lonelier than ever. It feels like people are walking through life on their own without being part of a group more than ever. By decentering religion in people's lives, by decentering Christ community in people's lives, we tend to take up an attitude of, I can do this on my own. I don't need community or other people. And that's simply not the case. The risk, and we're seeing this in so many ways, is that the negative thought patterns of our head and the stresses of the world, we're not carrying each other's burdens. And when we don't carry each other's burdens, they feel a lot heavier. When I was in seminary, when somebody was sick, we were all in community. And so sometimes we would cook, and you would just cook for 20 or 30 and see who showed up to eat, right? We sort of had our own little commune there. And I remember a friend of mine was sick, and I said, hey, how can we help? And she goes, can you do my dishes? And I went over and I did her dishes sort of joyfully. I did dishes for about 2 hours one day. And she was like, I can't believe you came over and did my dishes. I said, you know what's odd? I didn't mind doing your dishes. Have you ever felt that feeling when like cleaning somebody else or helping somebody else move or helping, somebody else, watching somebody else's kids for a little while? It feels different. When we are the goodness in the world, we represent the light that shines in the darkness. I found this out recently, and I've been sort of fascinated with it. We know about our minds that we can only focus on one thing at a time. But it turns out that anxiety and gratitude are in completely different corners of our brain. And we cannot process both at the same time. Gratitude, of course, is almost the antidote to anxiety. Not that it goes away, obviously, but it certainly is a treatment for anxiety. To sit and list the things that are good for you. And for me, I'm much more of a doer than a prayer. And so for me, going over to do somebody else's dishes or for me to lend a hand to somebody else gets me out of my own shame. It gets me out of my own guilt. It gets me out of my own dark moments when I can show up and bring just a tiny bit, just a crumb of goodness into the world. Well, of course, today is Be the Light Sunday. And Lutheran Services Carolinas is a really, really, really good way for us to focus our gratitude in the world. There are so many huge problems in the world. There is so much darkness across this earth right now that finding ways to lend a hand has become a huge priority for me, and I think for you too. And when I think about the dark moments in my life, they pale in comparison to the very real, very specific asks of this campaign for Lutheran Services Carolinas to raise a tiny $4.2 million, which was really a small number in order to solve some really big problems. The dark nights of my soul don't compare well to refugees fleeing their country, fleeing and living in camps or living in cities where they are not registered. The dark nights of my soul don't compare to foster children being torn from their homes and needing someone to bring light. The dark nights of my soul don't compare to adults who've experienced traumatic brain injuries. So in a little while after communion, Ted's going to be here and we're going to talk about pledges. This is not a guilt trip. This is not a manipulation of you, okay? This is an opportunity to bring light into the world. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5 that not only is he the light of the world, but he says you are the light of the world. Let us, good people of Christ the King, shine bright. Amen.